Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Spanning the Need. I'm your host, Anthony Spano. Today, we're going to change pace, and we're going to go into the news industry. And who else to talk about that is Stan Boney, WKBN news anchor and reporter, who has been in the industry for over 40 years. Actually, to be honest, in the same viewing area for that long.
That's correct.
So, Stan, thank you for joining us tonight on this episode of Spanning the Need.
No problem.
Everyone, I mean, you've been around a long time. You've been in the Youngstown market, Youngstown area, which covers probably about 500,000 people total.
Right, good number.
Is that? So why don't you kind of tell us how you started, where you became, why you wanted to be in the news industry, whether, and kind of talk about where you are now.
Well, I'm originally from Findlay, Ohio, which is between Lima and Toledo in the northwest corner of the state. When I graduated from high school, I actually wanted to get into sports broadcasting. That was my initial plan. So I went to Ohio University in Athens, which has probably the best broadcasting program in the region. I'm a little biased, of course, since I graduated from there, but they have a really good broadcast program, and I knew about it at the time. So I went there, I graduated. I worked at a small radio station in Dayton for about 4 months right out of college. And at the time that I had graduated college, WYTV was looking for a weekend sportscaster, but they weren't quite ready to hire that person yet. So I went to Dayton and I worked there for a few months. And in the meantime, WYTV then decided, okay, we have the money now. We're going to hire this weekend sportscaster. So I reapplied for the job and I got it. And I came to Youngstown in October of 1979. So last year was my 40th anniversary in the city. I started as a weekend sports anchor. I did some news reporting 3 days a week. And then I covered Trumbull County for a couple of years. Then I did the weather. And then we merged with WKBN in December of 2007. And then I became the anchor at WYTV. And then I became the anchor and reporter at WKBN. So, those 40 years, even though I've been in the same industry and in the same market, I've done a lot of different things in those 40 years. I didn't always have the exact same job. I just knew that if I was going to stay in this business for a long time and stay in this market, that I was going to have to be flexible. I was going to have to change with the times like everybody else has done in this city. I've just been fortunate enough to be able to move along with those times. And I've adapted as they've went along. And I do enjoy it. That was the other thing. Every position that I've had, I've adapted and learned to enjoy. And I really enjoy what I'm doing right now.
Well, and let's start talking about some of the positions that you held. You talk about you were a sportscaster when you first came into WYTV.
Right.
And you were doing the news 3 days a week as well.
Right.
And what was that like to really be in sports and really be in what you were passionate about once you came out of college and kind of into that professional position?
Well, I think when you're young, you're just happy to have a job. I was
that's a good point.
I was 22 at the time, and I was working in TV news, so I was just happy to be employed in the field that I had studied for. So I don't think I really thought of it as what it was like. I just kind of, here's a job. Do you want it? And I said, yes. So once I got into it, then's when opportunities arise. Hey, the Trumbull County, the bureau chief of Trumbull County opened up. You want that job? Yeah, I'll take that job. So I moved into that position. And then really the weather, when doing the weather was just a coincidence, really. The girl that was doing the weather before me left to take a different job. They needed a weather person. She left on Friday. They needed a weather person on Monday. They came to me and they said, hey, we need somebody to do the weather for a while. You're it. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So I stepped up and did it for a while. They thought I was pretty good at it. They asked me if I would like to do it permanently. They offered me a lot more money than I was making at the time. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And once I started it, then I was in it for 30 years or 25 years. I did the weather. I never, ever thought I would do that long, but I ended up doing it. It just kept on going from year to year to year to year. And then it really didn't change until WYTV and WKBN merged. And that's where the change in my career focus went at that time. But doing sports back in the early days, I really didn't think about it as like a challenge. It was just, I don't know. I've always thought of the whole thing as kind of just my job. And that's what I do to kind of get going.
And I don't know if you could see, but we found a picture from your days back when you first started.
That's probably the earliest picture that we have of me. You know, I remember doing that story. I did a story when I first came on Title IX at Youngstown State. That was a big deal at the time, getting women the amount of money in athletics to be able to compete be competitive with the men, at least financially and scholarship wise. I remember doing a series on it. That has to be probably, well, I'm going to say sometime in 1980. I came in 79 and I probably did that in 1980. And that's probably this is the earliest picture that I know of.
Yeah, this was dated. This was dated 1980.
Yes, the earliest one that I know of. Yeah.
And we, from help from some colleagues, they were able to provide some other stuff. But I think this kind of shows, like, hey, you've been in the business so long. Like, you started out in 79, 80, and now you're at a peak where you love what you do. And not many people can say that much anymore.
That is hard. Yeah, I know a lot of people don't really like their jobs, but I do like my job a lot. Yeah.
Well, and so once you kind of go from sports, and then you just talked a little bit about weather, what was it like to move to weather? That you talked a little bit about, like, hey, you're the guy now for the next 20 to 30 years. Right. What did that feel when you took over the weather as day by day went out? Like, what were you experiencing? Was it a good experience? Were you nervous?
Well, I didn't know a lot about weather at the time, which was one concern of mine. You know, I wasn't a meteorologist. Matter of fact, I did weather for several years. And then finally they decided to send me to school. About the time that I got into weather, Mississippi State University created a broadcasting program for people like me, people who got into TV news and then got into weather and needed some meteorology background. So they created a broadcast meteorology program that was done. Now it's all online. But at the time, it was more correspondence where they sent you videotaped lectures and you would watch them, and they'd send you books and pamphlets that you read. There was ways that you could work with people on campus, you know, if you had questions. And then you took proctored exams where you would go. I did mine at the National Weather Service office at the airport in Vienna, which no longer is in existence. So I would go out there, they'd proctor the exam, and I'd take it. So I really didn't know a lot about weather, which was my big issue at the time. But I eventually learned weather. You know, I had to go back to school, and I got really a certificate in broadcast meteorology. I couldn't get a degree because at the time you needed to be on campus to get that. I don't know what the rule is now. But this was when the program was first starting. I was probably a member of the second or third class at Mississippi State in the broadcast meteorology program. Now there's a lot of us all across the country, and I think the program's still in existence. But anyway, that was my biggest deal when I took over the weather, is that I didn't know meteorology, and I eventually had to go back to school and figure that one out. And yeah, that's my earliest shot doing the weather. Those were back when we had magnetic boards still at the time, and eventually now it's all computerized. So yeah, it was one of the earliest shots. That's the old WYTV studios.
Don't worry, Stan, I got a lot more of these.
Yeah, I know they're floating around out there.
Well, no, these are your colleagues helped and everything, and I think what people don't realize is it goes into a lot of preparation to do just a 5 to 7 minute segment of the weather each day. I mean, you got to do a lot of preparing and really do a lot of background.
Well, it's a full-time job. Yeah. I mean, you know, it depends on what the weather's like. Honestly, I mean, if you get a stretch of summer days where there's no sign of rain for a week, then it's a pretty easy period there. The job's not as hard. Winter weather is tough. And those are the toughest days when you have, you know, storm fronts coming in, you know, every other day, every third day, trying to figure out when it's going to snow, the time it's going to start snowing, the time it's going to end snowing, and how much is going to fall in between. Winter weather is a lot harder than summer weather. Though even nowadays, winter weather, we're getting better at it. It's just even in the years since I've been gone, the accuracy of forecasting winter weather has gotten a lot better. I mean, we can't do it 10 days out. We can't tell you if there's going to be a storm 10 days from now, but we're pretty good at timing the weather, 2 days out. We can let you know what time the snow is going to begin, what time it's going to end, and how much is going to come in between. We've gotten a lot better at winter weather just in the last 10 years.
Well, it is kind of funny because, a lot of people talk is, okay, it's going to rain 20%. You kind of give estimates, and people don't realize is those are estimate calls. They're not going to have, it's not fact, because they say you're the only job
forecast. It's not a,
yeah.
Yeah.
You're the only job that can call that, hey, I'm wrong. and be perfectly fine. And you know what? It is what it is. I mean, just look up, oh, it's cloudy. Maybe I should bring a coat or something like that. Well, what kind of feedback did you get if you weren't all right on the forecast? Just any good fun stories that you've
there was a farmer in Mercer County once, and I hadn't called for any rain the next day, and he was chopping hay. And I don't know that much about farming, but I know that when you cut hay, it needs to dry, and it can't rain on that hay. So you need a long period of dry stretch of weather. Now, I don't mean a month, but you need a few days. Once you cut it, it needs to dry, and then they make it into the bundles. And just this one little area of rain popped up in Mercer County that day, and it rained on his hay field after he had cut his hay. And he called me, and he was livid, just livid. And I apologized. And I don't think you could have forecasted this one little area of rain that had popped up. It was just bad luck on both of our parts. It didn't rain anywhere else, just in this one little area of Mercer County. And I remember this farmer was not too happy with me at the time.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, now technology is more predictable and compared to what that was.
I don't even know if the technology today to pick up that little cell. I don't know if it was that good or not.
Well, and you, like you mentioned, you were in that position for more than 30 years in the weather. One of your signature segments was the hat of the night.
It was. I did that for 10 years, yeah.
Talk about how that came about and how it all started.
Well, we had a general manager at the time. His name was Ray Maselli. And he was really, he was into promotion, and he was just looking for a way to tie people into watching our newscast. It was his idea. Literally, he called me in his office one day, and he said, I want to do it. We're going to call it the hat of the night. And you're going to wear a different hat every night on the air, and, you can promote whatever you want. That's what we did. So I probably wore, I don't know, I think I estimated one year about 10,000 hats. I did it for about 10 years. We had all kinds of different hats. So I did it for 10 years. I wore a different one. At the time, we were doing just a 6 and an 11 o'clock news. And I wore one at 6, at 1 at 11. So I wore 10 hats a week. Most of them were businesses. Though occasionally there were some nonprofits that were in there. I only had 3 rules of hats that I wouldn't wear. I wasn't wearing anything that was obscene, not even close to it. If it even smelled obscene, I wasn't going to wear it. I also wasn't going to wear, if Boardman was playing Canfield in football, I wasn't going to wear one of their hats to beat the other school, okay? And I wasn't doing anything political. I wasn't endorsing a candidate. I remember one time a school system called me and wanted me to wear a hat to endorse their school levy. And I thought, I can't do that, because what happens if somebody opposing the levy sent me a hat and wanted me to wear that? I said, so I just stayed away from politics altogether. No levies, no candidates, so no politics at all. Other than that, if it was just your business, you sold tires, if you're a construction company, I sent a lot of, it would be like National Nurses Week. They'd send me a hat, or something like that. And so I did most of those were things like that. And it went off pretty well. I certainly was well known for it for a lot of years. In the end, people always ask me what I did with all those hats. I didn't save them. There were just so many of them. So what I did after I wore a hat, I would put it into a trash can bag, the really big trash can bags. And one year, a guy who was a grotto clown called me, and he wanted some hats. And I said, oh, come on in. You can have a whole bag full. And so I gave them to him. And he came back a couple of times over the years. I think he went to hospitals, children's hospitals, and he would pass out the hats. And he felt like I was doing him a favor, but he was really doing me a favor too. Because if anybody that has a lot of hats, they take up a lot of room. So if I could get them out of there as fast as I got them in, I didn't really mind doing that either. So,
well, and that was going to be my next question: is what did you do with?
Yeah, I gave them away.
Well, and I think you did something that no one has ever done before. Did a hat of the night
idea. I've never seen it anywhere else in the country, and I think it was. It was not my idea. It was Ray Maselli's idea, but he's the one that came up with it, and then I kind of drove it from there.
Well, and it's funny because speaking of weathermen, I talked to one of them about you, and he gave me this quote. Stan Boney is passionate about telling great stories. He also loves the Valley, and you put the two together and you can understand while he'll leave a legacy for many years to come. Weatherman Jim Lowboy.
Yeah, he's good too. He's been around a long time.
Yeah,
he worked radio a lot of years, and then he changed with the times and came over and took over that morning show. And him and Len have really made a mark on morning TV. I mean, it's a little different, but that's what they needed to be. And he's good as well. Yeah, he's good. He's been around. Yeah, we've got 20 plus years around here.
Yeah, and there's some other people I've talked to, and me and Jim were talking, and he quoted that for you because you've made such an impact on him as well that he thought that would be appropriate, and I thought that would be appropriate to tell you that you may not hear that there are other people in the community that you have really influenced them throughout the years.
Yeah, I don't think you realize that sometimes. Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that's what, like, you've been around a lot. I've known you for 20 some years.
Probably.
And you're always a person that, hey, you can always bounce stuff off of, or hey, you'll call and say, hey, I need what's this look like, or something like that. So it's become I've always enjoyed having great conversations with you and just having a good old time just sitting and talking. And
it's fun. So I appreciate that.
And I think one thing that people may not realize is how things have changed news-wise over the last 30 years, 40 years.
Oh,
where you've gone from TV, normal TV, to now social media, digital media. Right. So can you talk a little bit about how it's changed over the years?
I think
from when you first started?
Biggest change to me is the amount of news that we do. I mean, I'm just going to talk on air. The digital platform, the web platform is, that's a whole different thing. But when I first started, I mean, we did a noon, a 6, and an 11. There was no morning news at the time. We did, I think Good Morning America was on then, and we would do 5-minute cut-ins during that. I think they still run from 7 to 9. So we would do cut-in news segments, I think every half hour, but that was all we did. There wasn't a pure morning show at the time. And then the morning news came along, and I think we might have started at an hour, and then it went to 2 hours. And I remember when the morning news started, I said, who in the world is going to watch news at 5 a.m.? Well, I've always worked nights. I don't realize people get up early. I mean, the people are up at 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the morning. And in the morning show, I've never been more wrong in my life. People watch news in the morning all the time. It's a very valuable segment of our news. And then they expanded the evening news. So we start at 5 o'clock. We go from 5 to 6:30. Then they added a 10 o'clock news because they picked up another channel, Fox Youngstown. So now we go from 10 to 11:30. Then they expanded the morning news to where they do 2 hours on CBS. Then they do 2 hours on Fox. And it's all live. So before we did an hour and a half of live news a day, and now we do like 9.5 hours of live news a day. So I mean, the amount of, and we do 2 hours on Saturday and Sunday morning. So I mean, the amount of news that we do is sometimes mind-boggling to me. One of the things I tell people is, if you do a story today, I mean, that's cool. If, let's say, you do a good story today, and one that everybody seems to affect people, well, it's a pat on the back today, and then it's, what do you have planned for tomorrow, or what do you have planned for the next newscast? Because there's no time there's no rest. As soon as the 6:30 is over, there's a 10 o'clock news, and when the 10's over, we go on again at 5. And when the morning news is over, you go on at noon, and then it just never ends. So the news cycle is nonstop. So that's the biggest thing I've noticed, is that you got to feed that news machine. So you always have to come up with new content, and you always got to move on to the next story. You know, before, a story might have a shelf life of a day, at least 24 hours. Now it's got a shelf life of hours, because once people read it on their phone, it's old news. So you got to always be coming up with new stories and new ways to attract the viewer and the people that are news consumers. If they consume the news, they consume it quickly, and then they want something new. They don't want old news that they've already seen. So that is the biggest change for me, is the amount of news that we do. And then when you add the web platform, it becomes a whole different thing at the same time, because that really never ends. I mean, at least on air, you have the break between 6:30 and 10, all right? There's a few hours there where you can kind of say, okay, let's take a break. But the web never ends. You know, you always got to be posting. People, I'm sure, are always surfing our website, even at 2 in the morning or 3 in the morning or whatever. They're always on there trying to see if there's something new that they can read. So it's the amount of news, to me, that is what's done it. The technology is another thing, but technology has affected everybody. I mean, you know, in the old days, if we covered a story in Youngstown, and let's say ABC wanted that story, we'd have to call a cab. The cab would come to the station. We'd give them a videotape. They would drive it to Pittsburgh Airport. They'd put it on a plane. They'd fly it to New York. Somebody from ABC would go pick up that tape, bring it back, and they would air it. Well, now
really?
You can be in the field shooting a news story, and you can feed it to all over the world simultaneously as you're covering it. So, I mean, the technology, you can't really talk about that so much, because everybody has dealt with the technology. If you've been around, you know, if you're in your 60s, you've seen the technology progress, and not just in news, in every industry in the world, the technology is pretty much it. So those are the two big things, the technology and the amount of news that we do.
Well, that's actually a funny story. You have to get on a plane,
You do.
take the tape to New York, and they'll pick it up, and then you pop it in, and they do what they do in New York.
They have the story. So you were looking at, I mean, if the story happened, you know, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they wouldn't air it until the next day. Right.
Now everything is with.
There was no technology. There was no internet.
Right.
And really, in the early days, we didn't even really have a satellite when I first started. So you couldn't feed it on a satellite. And then buying satellite time was very expensive at the time. So the cheapest way was just to fly it there. And we did that. We did that more than once. Yeah.
Well, that's an interesting backstory. Now try doing that now, where everything can be live. We can do this live segment and transport it all over the world within seconds.
10 seconds. Yeah, you can do it as you're doing it. I mean, we can link our phones to Facebook Live or whatever type of link you have on your phone, and you can broadcast live of where it's happening right this instant. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the technology and the amount of news.
Well, and let me follow up on that. Let me ask you this: you guys do solid stories, community, maybe a little bit broader outside of that, but you have I would say fake news, misinformation, and a variety of other stuff. Is that hard when you're getting the misinformation from those sources, or just talk a little bit about how it's changed, because now misinformation is the big thing, especially in our election.
Well, I just deal really with local stories. I mean, so any misinformation that I would get, would come from the source that I am interviewing. And I have gotten pretty good now at trying to double check facts. There's an old saying in news, and it's become a cliche among journalists. If your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. All right. So if somebody tells me something, I very often sometimes will go to a second source and confirm that, or to find out. Or if somebody is alleging something about someone, I will make sure that I go to that person, at least give them the chance to talk. Okay. So I don't really get involved in now I'm not going to tell you that I have never reported something that didn't end up to be wrong. Okay. Because sometimes people would give me information that is wrong. Sometimes they do it and they don't even know their information is wrong. Okay. But that's going to happen. But as soon as it happens, then you have to correct that misinformation. It doesn't happen a lot. But what I've gotten good at is double checking my facts. Sometimes it's hard to triple check, but if you can at least double check your facts and make sure you have everything right, then it's okay. Sometimes I even call back and run facts past people that I've already reported on and just say, hey, I want to make sure I got this right. You told me this. This is what I'm reporting. Is this right? And they'll write me back sometimes and go, you got it or you don't have it. So I just try to double check and make sure what I'm feeding out there is correct. As far as misinformation on the national scale, I'm probably in the same boat most of you are, because I don't really deal with like the presidential campaign, only if they would come to town. So I don't have a direct link to the Trump or the Biden campaigns. I'm pretty much just involved in local news. I don't get involved in covering national news unless those people actually come to town, and then I have to cover them when they're here.
Yeah, I can only imagine what you guys deal with in trying to, depending what the story is, to try to confirm those.
Sometimes it's hard.
Yeah, especially depending on what the situation is.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, very much so. Sometimes if you're actually on the scene, you can report what you see. And there's nothing wrong with that. I tell young reporters sometimes, when you go to a fire and the house is on fire, you don't have to confirm with the chief that the house is on fire. I mean,
right.
You can see it, okay? You can see what's going on, and you can see that the roof caved in, and you can see that it's threatening another house next door. You don't have to confirm all of that with the chief. You can see it yourself, and you know what's happening. Now, if there was anybody hurt, or was there anybody inside, or things that you're doing like that, there you need confirmation. But sometimes you can just show up and report what you see. If I'm going to a Donald Trump rally or a Joe Biden event, I just go and cover the event. I don't need to interview the candidates when it's over. I'll just cover whatever they said and whatever they did, and I'll report what happened at that event. So there's different ways to do things. There's other things where you have to call a lot of different people. Some stories are harder than others. Some you just show up and cover what happens.
Well, and speaking of stories, there was a story you did, a 5-part series back when you were about something that at the end of it came out to be a song that you sang.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I did cut a record. Yeah,
you cut a record because of the story that you did. Can you explain about that story, what it was about, and how?
It was called So You Want to Be a Star. And again, this one was assigned to me. It was kind of like the hats, okay? This wasn't my idea. My news director came to me, I believe it was 1982, February of 82. And my boss came to me, he says, we want you to do a 5-part series, and we want you to make a record, what it's like to make a record. So we called it So You Want to Be a Star. And I'm not a professional singer. I sing at church. I think I have an okay singing voice. It's certainly not recordable. I would have never made any money off my voice. I was never trained. I never went to music lessons. My mother's had a good voice. She was a pianist. She sang in the choir. But anyway, so what I did is I hired a producer. His name was Mike Pacelli. He would go on and he would work in Nashville, And I think last I heard, he's like living in the south of France. So I went to him. He was a young guy, lived on the West Side. And I said, hey, I need you to write me a song. And he wrote me a song called Hang In There, Youngstown. And I believe I met Pacelli through Gary Ramey at Peppermint Productions. I called Ramey and I said, I need somebody to write me a song. He sent me to Pacelli. So Pacelli wrote the song, and then we recorded it at Peppermint Productions. And then we sold it. Yep, that's me at Peppermint recording the song. And so we printed 1,045s, 45 RPM discs, and we sold them for $1 a piece. So there's still a few of them floating around out there. Every once in a while, somebody will go, oh, I got your record. So that's how that all came about. And I think, except for, I think it's only one of two songs that I've ever know of that was written about Youngstown. The other one was Bruce Springsteen's song, Youngstown. So I don't know of any others that were ever written specifically about the city of Youngstown. There might be songs out there that mention Youngstown, but nothing that's specifically about Youngstown. As far as I know, it's mine and Bruce Springsteen are the only two songs about Youngstown.
That's good company.
That's good company. That's very good company.
And it was funny because I was on doing some research for this episode, and as I was going through, there was a video of Bruce Springsteen doing an acoustic version on the Letterman show of, I think it was 1985 maybe, of Youngstown.
Came out in 85, and I think it was late in 85, and I think 86 is when he did it a lot. You're right.
And it's such a great song because it does tell a story.
It does. His is good, yes. Mine was more of a, uplifting song, like, hey, they we're down, but we'll come back. His was more the story of the city. Yeah.
And I think that it put kind of Youngstown in that notion of, hey, look, this is what they've gone through, because 85 would have been just a couple years after all the steel mills went out of business.
Right. It would have been.
I think 79, 81, 82, when I think we lost 30, 40,000 jobs.
I think it was 95 that song came out.
85, 95 might have been.
It was 95, yeah, and I think it was late in 95 that song came out. Yeah.
Well, and I think when you look at that, is you can make it to Nashville. You never know.
Oh, you can. Yeah, you can. Yeah.
Well, and so now we go from you're now in a different position than when you were with the weather. So now you're in the news. You move from weatherman to head news anchor on the anchor from the 6 o'clock and the 11. How was that transition? What was that transition like?
Well, that was part of the whole merger process. Okay. And that whole merger process was different. If you can imagine, the broadcasting business, especially the broadcasting news business, is very competitive. So WYTV and WKBN were competitors. So overnight, now we were friends. We do have different newscasts, but now I moved into their building and had to broadcast my newscast under their rules. I basically, they took over and I had to adjust. And, it was a different adjustment. I knew going into it there was going to be some adjustments, and I was prepared for those. And it wasn't long that we got in there. Not everybody liked the merger. We merged with X amount of people, and I would say within the first year, some of those people left because they didn't really like what was happening. One of the people that left was the lady that anchored our news. So she left. And several months after the merger, didn't take long. So I went to the news director at the time, and I said, you know what? Let me anchor the news. They literally needed it. It was kind of like the story with the weather. They needed an anchor overnight. I said, just let me. You were in
the right place at the right time.
Yeah, it was right. I took advantage of of what was there. I said, let me anchor the news, and I'll do the weather at the same time. We'll do them both. But I was just going to read the weather from the desk. We weren't going to make weather a big deal. We would just do a 2 or 3 minute weather forecast. And I said, I think I can do them both. So they brought in a female co-anchor with me that at least had some help with the news. And then I did the news and the weather. And eventually she left. We brought Paul Wetzel down. So me and Paul and Chad Krasinski for a while were the 33 team for, I don't know, a couple of years anyway. So then I just did news. I didn't have to do the weather anymore. Paul took over for that. And then eventually they came to me and said, hey, we want to move you to KBN. We're going to make you the evening anchor, like the late news, and then we want you to report during the day. I said, okay, let's go for it. I'm into that too. When I saw the opportunity, sometimes you just have to take these things because it's to save your job, kind of. It's like, hey, this is what we want you to do. Can you do it? And I've always said I can do pretty much whatever you want. Now, if we go off the air tomorrow and they want me to get us back on the air, I have no idea what we're doing about that. Okay, I can't help you. I don't know how technologically how we work. But if you want me to go cover this story, I can cover it. If you want me to anchor this newscast, I can anchor it. If you want me to do an interview with this person, I can do that too. So if I can do it, I'll help you out. And that's kind of been my philosophy. So they said, we want you to do the evening news. We want you to report in the afternoon. So let's see what happens. Let's go for it. And it's worked out really well. So I think I've been doing this. I think I either started in 15 or 16. So it's either my 4th or 5th year that I've been doing that.
Well, and I was talking with someone who worked with you for many years, and he says that Stan is the best team player I've ever worked with. He would go out on Friday night and cover high school football games for me. He would do whatever was needed to make sure we were for successful newscast. Very versatile, was a great weather, transitioned smoothly to news. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, Bob Hammond?
Yep, Bob Hammond.
One of the reasons I picked it off was the Friday night. Yeah, I used to like going out on Friday nights and covering football. Yeah, I don't do that anymore. I'm too busy to do that. And at KBN, they really have a full staff of people to get that done. But I enjoy Friday night football. I think Friday night football in Youngstown is really a big deal. And I really enjoyed that. And really, I'll do, if I can do it, I'll help you out. Meaning if I can, like I told you, I don't know how to, I don't sell, and I don't know if I could. I probably could if I had to. I could sell time if I had to. But I don't know anything about the technology. When the camera breaks, don't look at me. I can't help you out. I have no idea how to fix it. But if I can help you out any other way, I'll help you. I try to do the best I can with it.
Well, and that's funny because you were in sports when you first started.
I was, yeah. I mean, I'm still a sports fan. I just don't do it professionally anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and Bob talked about some good stories about Friday Night Football and what they did back then when at 33, and he mentioned that quote, and I thought that would be best to give you that to see. And I have to ask this question. Out of all your years, who do you look up to as a mentor during your career?
I really don't have any. I've asked that question before. I never really had a mentor. Okay. I guess I had a few people that I thought were really good. I've worked with a couple of general managers and news directors that are good. Ray Maselli was a good general manager. He was with me at WYTV, but also Dave Coy at WKBN. I'm not quite so sure he gets the credit that he deserves. I mean, he has been the general manager there for, 25 years, 20 years. I mean,
sounds about right.
That station's been bought and sold, I don't know, maybe 4 times since I've been there. He might have gone through 5 or 6 sales. And every company that has bought that station has kept Dave as the general manager. I mean, I think he's renowned in the country of knowing how to run a TV station. And I've been fortunate enough to work with him, for the last, 13 years since the merger. Same thing with Mitch Davis, our current news director. I mean, he's a good newsman. I go to Mitch a lot and I say, hey, Mitch, what should I do with this? What do you want to do with this? And he always seems to have an answer. Might not be the answer you like to hear, but at least he'd have an answer, and he'll know which way to go. And he doesn't shy away from anything that's hard. He wants to figure out how to get it done. I don't know if I'd call them mentors more than I would call them, people that I've worked with along the way who I've respect tremendously, who have been above me and been my bosses and have been good bosses at the same time, people that have helped me along the way that way. So I don't really have a mentor. I never really had anybody that looked up to me. When I was in college, just going to OU, I was around a lot of good writers. OU had a lot of good journalists, and just by reading their work, I could pick up and say, oh man, look how this guy writes, or look how they deliver. So I might steal little things off of them and go, I like that, and I work that. So I take something from this person over here and somebody from this person over here, and then I kind of eventually molded it into my own style. So I don't think I've been asked that one before. I don't really have somebody that I can look back on and say, oh, I modeled myself off of them. I've had good bosses along the way, which has really helped me. And I've kind of just stolen little pieces from people and put it all together and become me.
Well, and I think that brings up a good point is when you transition from kind of sports to weather to anchor, and now you're kind of looking at, hey, this is where I am now. I'm at the desk, and I know that there is a rumor going around that you are writing a book.
Yeah, I put that on the shelf.
And you've been working on it for years.
Yeah, it's probably not going to finish it.
Okay. Do you want to mention what it is?
Well, I was working on a book on the history of the Cardinal Mooney football program for a while, but and then we merged. Okay, I was working on it. I probably started it maybe 2004. And I worked on it for a few years, and then the merger happened, okay? And then I became the anchor. And when the merger first started, I was working 12-hour days, we were trying to get this whole thing merged and working. And, that first week, it didn't work very well, okay? So in the first month, it got better every day. So once it happened, I got involved in this, and my whole focus went on my job, not on this book that I had working on the side. And I pretty much put it on the shelf. It's still in a box downstairs. And people have asked me occasionally, hey, when are you going to do your book? And I said, I don't know. I probably won't, okay? Because it's just so much work to get it done. And I just don't see myself. I'll probably eventually donate my work to Cardinal Mooney and they can have it. But I probably won't publish it. I just don't think I'll probably get to it because it's still a lot of work to do. And I can't see myself doing that. I'm going to continue doing the stories that I'm doing now for the job that I have, but going back and finishing that book, I probably won't do it.
Well, and if people don't really know, that's a historical program.
Oh, it was, yeah. And the stories behind it are really fascinating. The people that grew that program and stuff. But it was fun to work on, and it actually helped my reporting and my writing. I think by doing that, I made myself a better reporter and made myself a better writer. I didn't make any money out of it. I didn't publish anything out of it, but I learned a lot, and I don't regret ever starting it, but I probably won't finish it.
Well, and let's get into stories about you've been doing stories a long time. Was there a story that you didn't get, but one kind of fell in your lap?
Oh God. I don't know. Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I've done so many of them. I told you one of my stories that we sometimes we hesitate doing stories on our own. When Don Guthrie got sick, Don Guthrie was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Okay, he eventually died from it, and when Don got sick, nobody talked about it. We kind of did internally, within the station. But I kind of thought, I said, you know what? I think Don Guthrie having pancreatic cancer is a story, okay? If the mayor had it or the congressman had it or the president of the university had it, it would be big news. Well, Don Guthrie was probably as well known as any of those people in our community. So I went to my boss and I said, I think Don having pancreatic cancer is news. Now, I said, I'm going to go to Don and I'm going to ask him if we can do a story on it. If he says no, that he doesn't want that out there, I respect his wishes. I won't do the story. But Don knows what we do. He works, he's part of the news division. He did the weather, but he knew what we did. So I went to Don. I said, "Hey, Don, I think this is news." And he goes, I agree with you. So he was going to Columbus to do some treatment. I followed him down there, and then I did the Don Guthrie story. And, and I think that was one of them. I don't say it fell in my lap, but it was one of those that people were kind of didn't want to talk about because, we knew the inevitability sometimes of pancreatic cancer is not good. But I went to Don and I said, I'll treat this well. I said, but I want to do the Don Guthrie has pancreatic cancer story. And it all worked out okay, I think. I think everybody was pleased with the story that I did on it. I think it certainly raised awareness to Don's issues. And that's probably one of the stories when I look back on that I was really proud of the job that I did. I've also told people it's probably the best story I've ever done. Okay. And it's, the way it came together and the way we told it, the way we did with it, I was pretty proud of that story. I was unfortunate with the way that it ended, but Don was a good guy, and to be able to tell his story, I was glad to do that.
I met him, I think, once or twice. Didn't really get to know him, but he seemed like a really approachable person.
Very good guy.
Really, really great guy. That everyone you can sit down and have a cup of coffee with him, just like he was your father or a relative.
Yeah, very, very nice person. Very nice guy.
And so there was another story you did big on that was really big in the community that you did a great job at was Lordstown Gm Closing.
Yeah, I was on that story for a long time. Yeah, that was from the moment that one was announced, that was going to be a huge, huge story. So I followed that from the day to the announcement, and I was there on the last day that it closed. That was March of, I guess, 19 maybe. It was a cold day. I remember standing out there on that overpass on Bailey Road there, and it was freezing, and everybody gathered out there. But not only that, but I covered a lot of the news conferences and leading up to it and gathering the pictures from inside the plant. And that was a big story. But the next big story then will be the reopening of Lordstown Motor. So it just it started with the closing of the Lordstown plant. And now that it's going, to the reopening of Lordstown Motors, there was a couple of months there, but not much. It wasn't that long after that the Lordstown Motor story came on. So that's the next story. And really the whole battery-powered vehicle story that's going on out there in Lordstown. The whole thing is huge. But yeah, I was on the closing of the Lordstown plant story. I did that one as well. Yeah.
And did that take the heart because of what it did to people locally?
A little bit. Yeah, that was not an easy story at all. Because a lot of those people that I had covered them for years, and now I had to cover them closing their plant. I'll tell you another weird one was a different one, was the closing of the Vindicator. I ran into a lot of those guys. I knew Bill Lewis and I knew Skolnick, and Joe Gorman now works with us, so I would run into these guys on stories. A lot, and I don't know if any of them. Bill Lewis has got to be a friend of mine. We never went out, but we would talk and we'd see each other out. And now these guys were losing their jobs, and they were closing their newspaper. I just thought I don't know if it was the same. People will debate what was bigger, closing of the Vindicator or closing of the Lordstown plant. Whichever one you pick, they both were big, but they both happened, I believe, in the same year. March is when the Lordstown plant closed, and then the Vindicator closed in August.
Yeah.
So I thought it was. It had a lot of impact on the community. And that was another one that, I'd see these guys out because they had made the announcement in June and they didn't close till August. And the women too, they weren't just men on this job, but I would see these people out and they knew they were going to be out of a job. They didn't know what they were going to do. Bill Lewis ended up retiring. Skolnick's he's still with the Vindy. But I knew I'd seen these guys out. I talked to these people out, and I just, I was still working, doing my trade, but I knew that they were going to be out of work, and that isn't easy sometimes.
Well, and I could agree because as I do charity events in the community or press conferences, I would always see the Vindicator and all the media, and You just feel bad that next thing you know, 150, 200 employees, part-time, full-time, are losing their jobs within a month. I think that was, that wasn't just local news. That was almost on a national
Oh, it
level.
was. Yeah, there about it, a lot of different national organizations came into town and did that Vindicator story. You're right, they did.
And
Same
I
with the Lordstown story.
yeah, especially the Lordstown, and it seems that this area is resilient because it's like we knock you down, but then you're going to get back up, and we're going to do better because we all take care of each other.
Yeah, we get knocked down a lot though. Whew.
Oh yeah, more times than we can get up.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes it's like, oh man, just give us a couple breaks, okay? Yeah.
I'm
I'm
totally.
hoping the Lordstown Motors things works out. I think they'll make vehicles out there. I'm hoping it's a long-term thing. So whenever you can see something good like that happen, you got to at least try to be positive. So we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that goes, especially with GM right next door, where
Right.
there'll be some sort of I would assume that down the road there'll be some sort of a partnership between, if there already is in some basis.
Yeah, I think General Motors has invested some money in Lordstown Motors. Yes. Yeah.
I agree. And so, what kind of, over the years, I know we've talked about Don Guthrie's story and some other ones. Which ones have moved you the most?
Well, anytime I do a story on people, those are the ones that move me the most. I just did one the other day on a guy who lives in Greenville. His name's Jeff Hughes. He was the music director on the Queen Mary 2, which is a huge cruise ship, probably one of the most famous cruise ships out there. In fact, he doesn't call it a cruise ship; he calls it an ocean liner. So he was the music director, and then when COVID hit, he was out of work. So, here's a guy that travels the entire world. He says he asked him rather than asking him where he has been, I asked him where he hasn't been. I think Thailand was one of the few places that he would like to go that he has never been. And it was really the only place he could think of that he hasn't been. So you can, everywhere else that a cruise ship would land, he has been to. But since February, he's been out of a job and he's living with his father in the house that he grew up in Greenville. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting story, an interesting perspective on people who have been affected by COVID-19. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Those are the type of stories that you kind of look at. And also, there's no sign of him going back to work. At least he thinks until spring. It's not like, oh, this will be over next week. They're calling me back. There's no sign of it ending. And even spring is a hope. So those are the type of stories that you work at and you hear about and you tell that it just kind of brings to light people. And I think those are the kind of stories. I enjoy doing those stories. I also enjoy doing political stories. Last night I covered the Christina Hagan-Tim Ryan debate. So I enjoy covering politics. I enjoy the campaigning end of it, but I also enjoy the after the campaign is over and now these politicians have to make decisions. They have to decide, even on the local level, a zoning change or a new law that's going to affect this or that. So will they allow a Myers store to be built in Boardman? I enjoy covering the debates around these issues, and I find that fascinating as well. So there's a lot of different aspects about my job. My favorite story is the one I'm working on right now. So that's kind of been my attitude. The one in front of me right now is the most important story that I have, and that's the one I try to do the best job at. And
that'll be out here shortly.
Yes.
And I think that's people understand that, hey, you're on at 6 and 11, or sometimes 5, 6, and 11. What's a fun story that you can tell behind the scenes, news or weather, over the years during your career?
Oh man,
that people may not know, like, hey, did the power go out and we lose in the middle of that, or?
Well, the power has gone out, but only that's going to happen. And that's going to happen again.
Yeah.
Usually at KBN now we have a backup generator that clicks on pretty quick, so you only lose power for like 2 seconds. I'm probably going to send you off the air for a while. I don't know, but anyway, when I did the weather outdoors years ago, we did it. When I did it at WITV, we did it outdoors, and we had a we created an outdoor set that had a fountain in it and trees, and we had a wooden fence that went around it. And one night I was doing the weather, and there were somebody was standing on the other side of the fence, and they started launching something over the fence at me. And I thought they were rocks, okay? So because I couldn't see, all I could see out of the corner of my eye was something coming at me, and I didn't know what it was, some type of a projectile. Well, as it ended up being, it was a roll of toilet paper. So they were throwing rolls of toilet paper at me, and it did get me flustered. I'm not going to tell you that it didn't. I finished the weather forecast, and I looked down to see what it was. Well, somebody had creeped up behind there, and when I started talking, they launched these rolls of toilet paper at me. So that was probably the funniest thing that's ever really happened to me on the air. And people on the air, I don't think they could notice because of, you're only looking at this screen that we're looking at now. So if something went through your side of the screen, I'm not quite so sure I'd know what it was. Okay. So the audience never knew it. But when I got done, I saw these rolls of toilet paper sitting around me. And that was probably the weirdest thing that's ever happened to me, on the air.
Well, and it's funny because you never know, live TV,
or
anything can happen, as we've seen in the past, from things that have been said on air and off air that are being recorded from all news medias across the country.
Right.
And I think it's funny that, hey, it happens.
It does.
And actually, it's funny because we talk about that we talked briefly earlier that you've been on the news in every different capacity. And I think viewers feel comfortable when they see you on screen, that they feel comfortable getting the news from you. Have you heard that from people in the community about that? Like, hey, we feel comfortable with hearing from you. We respect what you do. We like that you're on the news, and we feel comfortable like you're in our house that night for dinner.
Yeah, I think the comfort factor just comes from the number of years. I've been around so long now, that I think anybody that commits themselves to a community or a broadcast, for a lot of years, I think people just grow comfortable with them. I don't think you can put a value on longevity. So I think that is probably one of the big comfort factors that people might have with me. Just the fact that I've been around for so long, that I'm there every night and they've seen me for all these years. And when I pop up, I'm still there. Stan Boney's still on the air. And I think that I've been told that before, but I think that's the longevity factor of all the years that I've been here. And I think that's where it kind of works into play.
Well, and it's funny because we talked, and I talked to someone, and he said that Stan is the ultimate professional, someone who cares passionate about reporting the news in an unbiased manner to his viewing audience. He came to the Mahoning Valley right out of a highly acclaimed Ohio university and never left. Because he stayed, the people of the Valley are better for it. That came from former Vindicator writer and former sports information director at Youngstown State University, Greg Goulas.
Yeah, I've worked with Greg on a couple of projects. Matter of fact, he's working on the Jackie Robinson statue right now. So yeah, Greg's a good member of the community. I mean, he's been around a long time too. He knows a lot about this area. I think he's a former Bobcat. So
yes, that is correct.
I worked with Greg on a number of different projects over the years.
Yeah, and he mentioned that we talked a little bit. I mentioned about respecting people coming into your house and stuff like that, and he was real adamant. It's like, yes, that is so true. And then we gave the quote, and that's what he said about you. And there were some other people we talked to that actually look up to you as a mentor. Some of the younger news reporters and stuff that you've given them advice over the years. And so they appreciate that because you've been around in the industry. You've seen it change.
I try to help young reporters, especially ones that maybe aren't from this area. I mean, it's hard if you think about it. You come into town and you're, 22, you're right out of college or a couple of years out of college, and now you're covering a community that you know nothing about. So I try to help them the best I can, to find people and help them. And that's usually the part I do. And I'll look at their stories and I might give them a little critique here and there. I try not to beat them up too bad, So I try to compliment them when they do good things and then critique them when I think something could change. But I've kind of taken that additional duty on as well, only because, again, that comes with the longevity factor. I've been here for so long, and I've been there and I've done that, so I might as well pass along some of that knowledge to the younger reporters too.
Well, and so now, the last 6 months we've been dealing with the pandemic.
Right.
How have you been handling the pandemic?
I haven't missed a day of work. I didn't work from home at all. I went to work every day. At the beginning, I think it was just like everybody else. I wasn't quite sure what was going on. Like, is this real? Is this a big deal? Do we need to worry about this? And then it just kept on going and going and going. I've covered a lot of pandemic stories. I've covered people that I've covered families who have lost people to it. I've covered people who have been sick with it. I've covered the doctors and the nurses who have dealt with it. I've covered pretty much every angle that I could think of the COVID story. I've done all the broad ranges of it, but it hasn't really. I'm still working, which I feel fortunate of, and I know that it's an issue, so I'm still covering it. And I know about that, but I don't really, as far as longevity terms, so I'm just going to kind of ride this one out and see where it goes. I'm kind of like with everybody else that it has to end eventually. I just don't quite know when that eventually is going to be.
Some people say it could be spring of 2021.
Yeah, I've heard there's all kinds of numbers floating around. Yeah.
They even said November 4th.
Yeah.
Right after.
A little bit early, but I know what they're saying. Yes.
And it's weird because I went home and started working from home, and it was just a different parameter that we were all dealing with. Stuff was shut down, businesses were closed. You can't really do much like you're used to. There's no normal, and there may not be normal for a while.
We had a lot of our staff working from home too, so it wasn't just, even though I was working at work, most of our staff was working at home. There were only a few of us still in the newsroom, and that was a little strange for a while. So it was just a few of us that were there. So dealing with people that were working at home, not having them sitting next to you, was certainly something different that we all had to deal with.
And I think we just kind of rolled with the punches and said, hey, technology's there.
Right.
And I think we learned a lot about technology and how we can now do stuff.
Right.
And so now, we're over 40 years of serving the Valley. What's next for Stan Boney?
I'm doing a story this afternoon on the Marty Desmond Paul Gaines race for Mahoning County prosecutor. That's where I'm kind of at. People ask me all the time, when are you going to retire? My standard answer is when I turn 70. I'll be 63 next week. I don't know if I might go beyond 70. I might go below 70. I don't know what I'm going to do. I enjoy it still. I did a story on A.C. McCullough a couple weeks ago, celebrated his 50th anniversary in broadcasting. I asked him that. So when are you going to retire? He goes, I don't know. Because people ask me that all the time. I enjoy what I'm doing. I don't know when he's going to retire. When he can't do it anymore. I'm hoping it doesn't get to the point where somebody taps me on the shoulder and says, Mr. Boney, you've done a nice job. We appreciate it, but we can't understand what you're saying anymore. Okay? I'll be out before then. But I'm not to that point yet. I can still do what everybody does. I'm still healthy enough to do this. And really, 63 is not that old. So I can go easily 10 more years. Joe Biden's running for president at 77. Donald Trump's in his 70s. And look what he does. Like him or dislike him. The guy, he's got some stamina. So, and same with Joe Biden. He's 77. And presidential campaign's got to be really hard on your body and on your voice and on your whole, everything. So if those guys can do it, I can go into my 70s too. I just don't know if I will. But I'm not going anywhere for a while. I still have 2 years left on my contract. I'm going to finish that out. And if they give me another one, I will probably keep going for a little while after that. So I'm going to work for a while. I'm not going anywhere anytime real soon.
Well, it's funny because the campaign this year is 10 times different than it ever has. There's not as much travel as there used to be, but it's still, I think, a presidential campaign. And just being president of the United States got to be a lot of work. It's just a lot. I would agree.
Never stop thinking. You're always on. So, And those guys, they pull it off. Yeah.
Well, and the other thing about that is if you love your job,
Yes.
no matter if you're getting paid $50,000 or $1 million,
right? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You're going to be doing what you love, no matter if it's now or 5 years from now. And we'll actually have AC and Kelly on Thursday to talk about their careers and everything like that, so we can look about what AC has done over 50 years, and that's a long time.
It is a long time. I agree with you. Yeah, that's a long, long time, and I give him all the credit in the world. Same thing. I mean, there's been a lot of changes in radio over the years, and he's hung in with those changes. So I give him all the credit in the world for hanging in there all those years.
Last question for it.
He loves it, so it's not work to him. So
exactly. You get. And last question. If there was one thing you learned from your career, what would that be?
Recognize your luck. Okay. I think I've been lucky a couple of times. I've been in the right place at the right time. You mentioned that earlier. I think people get into a business and sometimes they don't recognize when they have a chance to go somewhere. I think when we were looking back at the merger of WYTV and WKBN, some employees looked at it as a negative. Oh man, we're going to go up there, we're going to merge. It's not going to be the same. No, it's not going to be the same. But you got to look. I went up there thinking, all right, here's what we got. Let's do what we can. Well, eventually I became the anchor at WYTV, and then I became the anchor at WKBN, and I wouldn't be doing now what I'm doing if it wasn't for the merger. So I had to take a look at this merger, and I had to use it for something to my benefit and not as a negative. I think people sometimes look at things and think, oh, this is a negative, it's not going to work, rather than trying to find a way to make it work, which is what I kind of tried to do my whole career. So I think that's probably the one thing you got to, and I didn't recognize how lucky I was for this to happen. So I used this little luck that I had, and I turned it into a positive rather than making it a negative. So you got to recognize your luck. Hey, somebody decides to move. You're in a position and you want the person above you's job. That person all of a sudden moves for whatever reason, and you say, well, now's my lucky break. I have a chance to get that person's job that I've wanted. Well, you got to recognize your luck and then you have to go after it. So that's one of my terms. You got to recognize when there's some luck in front of you, and then you got to take that and turn it into something good.
Well, Stan, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that you're a busy man, and I hope you enjoyed our conversation. You're always welcome back to my show.
Tony, thanks a million. I appreciate it. Nice job.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on Spanning the Need. You can look at other interviews or announcements at anthonyvspano.com. God bless and have a great night.